that way, is the causal principle. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to give you a cosmological argument, but not one that says let's put aside our presuppositions and go to our observations and then generalize and draw deductions and so forth. I am going to go to the causal principle, though. I'm going to say let's look at that causal principle. The causal principle, to put it another way, is what we call the foundation of inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning says that I can take instances from my experience and generalize from them either across time or ahead in time. By across time, I mean simply, if I learn certain things about crows, I should be able to generalize about all crows at that very moment. I learn something about the nature of crowness when I study individual crows. But that's an inductive generalization from particulars to the class of crows, okay? Or to the nature or property of crowness. Ahead of time, what I mean by that is I can generalize from events that I'm familiar with to what will happen in the future. So if I've dropped an apple, 10 times in the past, or I've let go of the apple and it has dropped, so I've seen the event of letting go of the apple leads to the event of it dropping, I would inductively generalize that the event of letting go of the apple 10 seconds from now will lead to the event, or would be followed by the event of it dropping to the ground. Inductive generalization is the basis, then, of our causal reasoning. But can that be justified? Is it reasonable to expect that we can generalize from particular cases to either properties or to future events? Now, what if we can't? What if it's not rational to do that? This is where a lot of students drop out of the philosophy class and say, I think I'll go take some psychology instead. So, who cares about the inductive principle? Well, what I'm assuming here is that you care to be rational. I know that you care about the inductive principle because you can't live without it. You can't reason without it. You can't use language without it. You can't live your life. Simple illustration that many of you have heard, we all learn when we stub our toe to try to avoid stubbing our toe next time, right? Why do it? Because we assume that if it hurt in the past, it will hurt in the future. But that, of course, that presumes a certain view of reality, a certain kind of continuity or uniformity in the world, in terms of which I can inductively generalize. So I'll go back to the cosmological argument, pick up the causal principle, and ask now, is there a reason for believing that inductive reasoning is well grounded, that there is causation in the world? And I now address this to the unbeliever and say, now you need to use the causal principle. You need to use inductive reasoning. You're using it. Is it rational for you to do so? Let's say this unbeliever has come to me and has said, is it rational for you to be a Christian? Be prepared to give an answer to every man who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you. The guy comes to me and says, is it rational to be a Christian? My approach to him apologetically is to ask him, well, is it rational to use the causal principle? Is it rational to engage in inductive reasoning? He says, well, of course it is. And it's because us scientists have used the causal principle in inductive reasoning that we know that you Christians are irrational. And I say, well, wait a minute, not so fast. How do you know that it's rational to use the inductive principle? What would have to be true in order for you to use the inductive principle? Now, if you study this or listen to my debates and lectures that I have on this, you already know, the best in the unbelieving world openly admits that there is no justification for induction. No justification in the traditional narrow philosophical sense. We can't offer you some principle which itself is well grounded by which we could justify the inductive principle. In the end, I already told you, Quine says we use the inductive principle because we're the kinds of creatures that have survived, and the only reason we've survived is because we use it. And when Quine says that in The Web of Belief, at least he's an honest enough philosopher, I have to respect him for that, he immediately says, and that, of course, is a subtle begging of the question. I'm not quoting him, but it's words to that effect. He says something to the effect, in subtle ways, that's already assuming the inductive principle when I offer that as the rationale for the inductive principle. Okay, so now what I'm getting at is that I am going to offer a proof for the rationality of Christianity that goes something like this. Without the Christian worldview, rationality itself is unintelligible. That the methods you have been using as a scientist to argue against me as a Christian themselves reduce to subjectivism and skepticism unless you have the Christian worldview as the framework or context for using them. Here I'm not appealing to a rational deductive argument. I'm not saying I've got a clear and distinct idea of God's existence. Nor am I giving a cosmological deduction. I'm not appealing to empirical evidence. I'm not appealing even to pragmatic success, although you can rephrase the argument to look deductive, empirical, or pragmatic in various ways. I mean, if you want to be successful at the game of intellect, then this is a pragmatic argument. But I hope you can all see that though you can metaphorically talk about a transcendental argument in those ways, it's a distinct form of reasoning that is asking, what is the broader framework in terms of which we do these other things? And my Christian apologetic is to this effect, that if you don't have the Christian worldview, you're not able to reason, make sense of reasoning, or prove anything at all. Ultimately, I'm not assuming that the unbeliever is able to prove things rationally or empirically, what have you, and now I'm going to try to satisfy him by giving him enough grist for his mill. It's not that I'm going to provide the raw material now that he can use his reasoning process and prove God's existence. I'm going to say your reasoning process proves God's existence. Because if God didn't exist, you couldn't make sense out of reasoning.
This recording has been released into the public domain by the Bahnsen Institute. Duplication, sharing, and distribution is encouraged. For more information about the life and ministry of Dr. Greg L. Bahnsen, visit our website, BahnsenInstitute.com, where we aim to bring into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ.